Okay, perfect. So today's topic is the American dream is out of reach and what comes next. As usual, the disclaimer, just to get that out of the way, this is just an educational webinar. And so for any investment decisions, please make sure you consult with your legal and financial advisors. All right, so a lot of people talk about the American dream and what happened to the American dream, and the American dream in the context of owning a house. One of the still few nations, industrialized nations in the world that people used to have the ability to buy homes and own homes if they have decent jobs and incomes, single or double incomes. And right after World War II, it became a lot easier as the mortgages, the 30 years mortgages and the 15 years mortgages and the subsidies by the government. It was intended for every American family to own a house. Now, in certain inflation periods and inflation in terms of market cycles, that kind of went up and down. Everybody remembers what happened in 2007, 2008. And, that bubble of prices that burst and everything was kind of affordable again, but no one was able to get a loan, and that took a while before it came back. So what we're going to discuss now, it's more of a sustained phenomenon that we're starting to see in the market, and it's becoming more and more difficult to own a house. And so what I'm sharing here in the first chart is the delta. The dark green is the mortgage cost versus the light green, which is the average rent for about the same size in the same market. And so you can see that the rent and the mortgage historically has paced each other, which means that it was almost equal to rent or to buy. And for many, it made sense. It made more sense to buy. You can see here there's a delta a little bit around the 2006, which was the peak of home values before the crash, and later in 2007, early 2008. And you can see how rent became more expensive, but the problem was people weren't able to get approved for loans. So home values went down and mortgages went down. And then kind of had an equilibrium point towards right before COVID, where it went back to normal. Now, since COVID, with the huge inflation and rise in interest rate to combat inflation, we did see a tick in the rent side of things, whether it's apartments, complexes, or single family home rents. But compared to what happened to the mortgages, it's still relatively mild because the mortgages went up significantly. So if you can imagine, when the interest rate was 2.5% or 3%, and now it went all the way up to 7.5%, now it's kind of like hovering in the 6.4, 6.5. It doesn't feel like it's a lot, but it's actually double the payment. So if you look at the chart, we went up from $1,500 to almost $3,000. That's an average. So the interest payment doubled, and therefore the mortgages also doubled. So that's something we see, especially in the last 2+ years, 3 years now, that mortgages and houses are just harder to buy, especially for first-time home buyers and newer families. And typically, we've seen these kind of phenomena in maybe the East Coast and the West Coast and heavily populated, high demand areas. But actually, this time around, it's across the board. And so you can see there's a lot of East and West Coast cities on the list. But you have Austin, you have Tulsa, Oklahoma, you have Oklahoma City, you have Kansas City, Dallas amongst many. So you see that even the cities that are historically affordable became less and less affordable over time. So it's not just a phenomenon where in the big cities where real estate is super expensive, but across the board, and that's driven by the mortgage problem. What's funny and sad in a way is the development is actually not keeping up with the demand. Even though that it's harder to buy homes, there is not enough homes to begin with. And that's actually driving the price even further. So what you see here in the left side of the chart is how much surplus or shortages from a single family home point of view between demand and supply. And year on year, we have further and further deficit and shortage from suppliers, although the home builders um, continued to develop homes up until COVID, and they slowed down afterward. And that's where you see the peak here past 2020. So we have I would say, a decade worth of shortages. And you can see it here across the board again, even in the South, which everybody's migrating to the South away from the West and East Coast. It's still, there's a huge shortage in single family homes, despite how expensive they become. So the demand is decreasing, but the supply is decreasing even faster. And that's a challenge. It's a double challenge for people to find affordable housing. And there's not a lot of incentives for developers to go develop new communities because it's too expensive to build right now. The construction loans are also interest so high. So from a real estate developer point of view, it's still not making a lot of sense to build a lot of new communities. So they're kind of slowing down development at this point. On top of that, there are certain things that are kind of driving a shift in behavior, and we've seen that accelerate after COVID, but it's been kind of brewing over the years. People move into between cities and try not to commit to buying homes, looking for financial flexibility. We see this in homes. We see this in the introduction of car leases in the past, 10, 15 years. Having the ability to relocate jobs, move between cities has become more and more increasingly happening in the US, whether it's migration for better jobs or more friendly states or lower cost of living. So that owning a home long term, although the average was, I think in the US was 7 years as the average of home ownership, even though the loans are normally typically longer. But having that financial flexibility is driving the need for alternative solutions where I don't want to buy the house and get stuck with it in case I need to move. Same thing with the remote work spaces, especially after COVID. A lot of people want to work from home. Their home may not have offices or properly set up to have, to work there every day, especially if there are two people working from home. And so that also kind of changed the dynamics of where people live. Are they more in the suburbs, away from maybe the more centralized locations in the city, i.e. cheaper land and cheaper ways to build homes, but also, having to work remotely, there's a lot of people migrating to Texas, for example, and their jobs are somewhere else just for the sake of cost of living and finding better opportunities in terms of having, a bigger home, a nicer lifestyle, but still work in other places. So that's another kind of trend that's happening is people want to see some flexibility without owning a home, and then the increased demand on working from home. And the solution is you either go rent an apartment complex or rent a single family house from a landlord or buy a house. So that kind of decision led people to first kind of enjoy Class A apartments and say, hey, that's where I want to live. And that's my lifestyle to have a nice set of amenities and a nice neighborhood and a nice apartment. But over time, it becomes less and less practical for someone to live there beyond maybe a year or 2 or 3 years. So people started looking for a less dense neighborhood. So you still have that ability to enjoy the amenities and being around the major attractions in the city, etc., but not having to be forced to live in an apartment complex is another thing that they were looking for. The likes of, hey, I want to have a little yard and maybe a dedicated car garage and have a little bit of more privacy, etc. So the need for less dense neighborhoods is increasing from a rental point of view as an alternative to the traditional apartment complexes. There are a few other things that are kind of happening In parallel, millennials in general are becoming more and more renters by choice. For the same reason I was talking about, is avoiding that commitment to own a house, the flexibility of changing jobs and relocations, and not worrying about maintenance and all the things that comes with owning a house. So we've seen this trend more and more visible in the millennials than before. Um, Besides the fact that it might not be even affordable, so kind of like renters by force versus renters by choice. The same thing applies to, if I want to own a home, well, I may not have access to great amenities and outdoor spaces. So that's why people try to find nicer neighborhoods to live in that they cannot afford, so that choices go live in a master plan community or go live in a nicer apartment complex. And then we talked about the high cost of ownership. So all of these combined have kind of pushed people to rent more, and they want options while renting as opposed to owning. So what comes next? Historically, there was a lot of attempts of building townhome communities with common area agreements or HOAs, where you have a bit of ownership of a condo, for example, or a townhome in a neighborhood, but there is shared maintenance fees that is required by all the owners of that neighborhood. But the build to rent concept kind of materialized, I would say, over the last 10 or so years. I'll share some stats on the growth of build to rent. And the concept of build to rent is basically, it's a neighborhood of houses that were built specifically to be for rent from day one. So the design of the community will be, it's going to be a gated community. It's going to have the nice set of amenities, the clubhouse, the pool, all the things that comes to mind when you rent from an apartment complex, but also it's set up as individual homes that people can enjoy the lifestyle of owning a home. So it's like a hybrid model where it's a nice community with all the amenities, the spaces, all the sort of lifestyle that people are looking for in a nice neighborhood, but also the houses are also family friendly and they're built to rent. So that's kind of the idea behind them. So think about it as single family homes, but they were designed from day one to be a rental property as opposed to a normal house. So what makes built to rent different? We talked about modern amenities, nice privacy, and having that sense of community still. So you still have an individualized house, 2-car garages, a private yard, but you still live within a community. So you enjoy both the privacy side and the community side. And the best part about it, it's professionally managed. So all things maintenance and the headaches of dealing with issues in the house, etc., are managed by the third party. So think about it as, maybe it's a community of 50 houses, maybe it's a community of 200 houses, but it's completely managed with professional on-site staff that is working there 24/7. So you'll have the leasing agents, you'll have the property manager, you'll have the maintenance crew in the community throughout. So I was talking to you a little bit about why and where is the demand coming from, and how BTR is becoming more and more popular from a resident point of view. Shifting gear here, I'm talking about why is it attractive to investors as well, real estate developers or investors in general. And so one thing, because of that mismatch in supply demand, it's kind of BTR is in that sweet spot to say, hey, I'm going to satisfy that lifestyle and that demand to have a nice home to grow my family, but it's also rental. So that mismatch between demand and supply is causing rent to grow faster than what you see on the apartment side. We'll see an example here in a second. They're very popular still. They're not built everywhere, and it's not like in every corner of every city. So people are looking for these, and they have low vacancy rates. So most of the time, they're on a standby list or wait list to even get into some of these communities. Both of those, provides strong net absorption. Absorption is the ability to rent a community once it's built. So as a real estate developer, let's say we build a 100-unit community, we will be able to lease it relatively fast compared to leasing an apartment complex. What's also nice about it is because that it is a house at the end of the day, the tenant will feel a sense of ownership and take care of their house, as opposed to typical apartment complex renters who may stay only for a year, maybe renew for another year. So you'll have lower residence turnover, people who love that lifestyle and enjoy the schools around the neighborhoods and enjoy that all the amenities that comes with it. Normally they don't leave. Those are 2 to 3 bedroom houses. Family can new families can own those and grow their family for multiple years. So you'll have a more stickiness resident in those, and that's makes it attractive to have sort of more guaranteed rent as an investor, but also less maintenance cost of turnover between residents. You have diverse consumer sets. Some are built for sort of younger families, first-time home buyers. Some are built more for sort of a nice lifestyle senior communities as well. So you can have actually different diverse type of residents and those, and then that allows us to also build a different set of offering for our investors, for example. So if someone has if apartment complexes became a higher demand on apartment complexes, can drive higher demand on BTR and vice versa. If there's an incentive to sell those houses, for example, the two candidates, actually, speaking of the debate, are proposing first-time home buyers incentives and investors incentives. So it also gives the investor the ability to exit if someone decides to buy their unit down the road. That's an exit option for the investor as well. So it gives a diversification even on the exit side. And so normally these are built and then leased, and then a big private equity group or another investor would buy a turnkey community as if it's an apartment complex. It's basically a community, but it feels like an apartment complex when you have steady income of 100 homes, plus the amenities, plus the management. So it does qualify for multifamily loans, subsidized multifamily loans. It does qualify for, it provides all the benefits of owning a multifamily community. So it is very attractive for secondhand investors, whether they're private equity or multifamily investors. And the good news is, because there's not a lot of them yet, and they're not very spread out, or you don't see them everywhere, basically. There's not a lot of institutional exposure. So a lot of you hear about how the BlackRocks of the world are buying all the houses in town, and that's driving more and more prices to go up. But if you look at, the BTR, because it's kind of like a newer asset class, there's not a lot that has been scooped yet, if you will. But that also is an opportunity for investors to continue to build those. So it's not, I would say there's still a huge premium to sell those to investors because there's not a lot of competition yet. Okay, so I talked about a little bit on the pros and cons, but I'll recap here. The pros of a BTR, it removes the stigma of renting, still is a nicer rental experience as opposed to apartment complexes. It attracts a type of people who wants to live in a house but don't want to buy one yet. And like I said, they take care of their house, and so they're sticking around, they are renewing, and they're taking care of the home. And because of how popular BTR is and how it's not, the supply is not that great yet, we've seen a lot of premium on the exit price. So cap rates are much lower than your typical Class A multifamily apartment complex. And that makes it very attractive to investors as well. I'll show you a chart here, but in Dallas, I believe the rent increases year on year are still outpacing the rent in the conventional apartments. The cons of BTR, the barrier to entry for investors, those are niche products, custom products. You have to build the community as BTR from day one, providing the right product, the right amenities, and the right range for prices. So the cost is high. You have to work through the whole construction process, from owning the land, working with the city on the zoning and the permits, going through that construction phase. So it's a little bit more specialized, and it requires basically people to build them from the ground up. So it's a higher barrier to entry. It's not like your typical single family home community or apartment. So a specialty, but it's rewarding. It does cost more to build than apartments, and that's logical because you're not as dense. You're spreading them out. You may share some roofs on few units, but it's still higher cost per unit. And then to create that nice lifestyle that everybody's looking for, you still have to have the pond, the pickleball courts, the swimming pool, etc., the green spaces as well. So it is less dense. It will cost more to build, but we still see that it's a very popular investment strategy. Just to compare kind of like the journey of BTR over the years, here's a chart that shows the annual sales of built-to-rent communities, and it's very modest. There were few that were built here and there, maybe more on the East and the West Coast, because they saw that mismatch of mortgage and rent much sooner than the rest of the US. And it peaked in, post-COVID. Part of this was the easy money phenomena, and everybody wanted to jump in, but part of it is the actual need and demand driving these BTRs. As opposed to multifamily, you can see that multifamily were in the hundreds of billions of dollars industry, as opposed to just recently kind of crossing the 2 billion mark on the BTR side. So the good news here, BTR is growing, and it's gonna continue to grow, offering this hybrid lifestyle that we talked about. Here's another chart showing how, for example, in Dallas, the average year-over-year rent growth is 7.2%, as opposed to apartment complexes were in the 4 to 5%, for example, in the same area. So talking about institutional investors in BTR and why it's becoming more and more popular. We talked about how this is a more niche and custom development exercise, and a lot of investors don't like to go through that process. So what you see here is that development value creation process. Things take time with these kind of projects, by getting the land, working with the city on the entitlement, whether it's incentives from the city or working with them on the utility side and the permitting, and deciding what we want to build there. And then going through the design phases and finishing all the plans. And most of the time, some do take loans to work on the land side, but most of the time is equity only. So it's a cash business, and it takes a while. So in a way, this phase here is not leveraged, and there's not a lot of incentives short term. And that's why it's more of a long-term game for people to go in and work on the land and develop it before they even build a community. So that's one barrier to entry. but you can see here the value creation in every step of the way, and then working on the land itself and building the units as a community. It requires a combination of equity and construction loan. The next phase of value creation is to actually secure the leases. So if this is a 100-unit community and you lease 95% of the units, then all of a sudden this community became a multifamily property. And so it will be treated as multifamily, it will be looked at as multifamily. And that's normally where people go and refi into a permanent loan, release some of the equity back to the investors, and continue to operate the property until the final sale. So you can see here, there's multiple stages of value add creation, which is normally a lot bigger than maybe buying an existing multifamily property and adding that value by renovation. But this takes 3 to 5 years from left to right. So for some of the investors, it may be a more difficult exercise because of the skills required and the time required, but the reward is definitely there. So from the type of who invests in these and who normally is a typical second hand buyers after the community is built and leased and stabilized. So there's multiple exits, but the typical owners of these can be real estate developers like ourselves and InvestStream. It might be a partnership between two different groups. The real estate, the REITs, the trusts, and private equity. So normally those are the typical type of buyers that would come in as second hand after the development phase. The other thing that is nice about these, and I touched on earlier, is the ability to have flexible exits. And this is one of the reasons we really love those, because yes, they were designed to be built to rent, but they can be easily converted into a condo in a neighborhood. So the business plan will always be, we're going to build it, fill it, sell it. And but if for some reason home buying became so subsidized and the interest dramatically went down, and there are some incentives from the government to help first-time home buyers, then because they're a home, because they are individually deeded most of the time, they have their own car garages and yards, etc., people will have a tendency to actually buy them instead of moving again and finding a new home. So it gives that flexibility for us as investors to, although it's not a plan A, but you always have a plan B and a plan C in these kind of investments. So sometimes you actually have smaller investors like direct owners who would like to buy 10 units, maybe one rooftop. And so that's another exit strategy. Instead of having individualized, maybe there's a couple of smaller investors who wants to buy sections of the community, if that makes sense. And for all of these reasons, we're all in. In fact, we're working on 3 projects coming soon to our investors, and 2 of them are BTRs. One is targeting that younger sort of first-time home buyers demographics, and the other is actually targeting seniors who would like to have a nice lifestyle, downsize experience. So from us, looking at where the market is going and having that flexibility I talked about, we see it as a nice niche that we're specializing in, and will be more to come on that for our investors in that space. But we're all in. We love those in Texas. We love those in Oklahoma, and the whole sort of new wave of migration, if you will, new destination of migration in the US. And we believe those are just going to gain more popularity over time. And it's an exciting time for us to be in that space. All right, a little bit about us. These are some of the assets that are under management here in Houston. We have been working mainly in Houston and expanding into Oklahoma City and Dallas areas. A sample of our multifamily projects, industrial warehouse projects, and ground-up construction for multifamily. We also our director of development, who joined the team about a year ago. We have been working on developing commercial real estate projects in few of the IHOP stores in Oklahoma City and some of the Jack in the Boxes, among many other development projects. A little bit about myself. Been doing real estate for now 3+ years. We actually just celebrated our third anniversary here. Background, been in M&A most of my career, and worked in oil and gas and technology in the past. So kind of bringing that passion of how to create value and how to bring better experiences and better products for our tenants and better investments for our investors. So been enjoying this and kind of growing into the newer markets that we're excited about. And my business partners, Dr. Baha is a neurologist in Oklahoma. And my other business partner is Yusuf, is a doctor of pharmacy, also a serial entrepreneur in the medical space. Meet Uncle Wes. He's our development arm in the business, and got us excited about going into ground up development, and that's kind of what we're focused on in this market. And working with Marquise as well, native Houstonian, been helping us with the acquisition process. All right, so this is the rest of the team. I'll pause here for any questions or feedback. If you'd like to join our list and understand what we do and the types of projects we work on, you can scan the QR code you see on the screen, and we'll be happy to share more details with you in the future. With that, I really thank everyone who joined today. Appreciate it, and we'll see you next month.